need to fire someone in your business right now? Let's say you've just come out of your busiest period. Maybe it was the tax deadlines or Black Friday sales or the January gym rush. Either way, being busy in your business often gives you extra clarity on who in your team is performing well and who isn't. And so you're wondering, should I fire them or can they turn things around? On one hand, you don't want to act too quickly and regret losing someone who could improve and perhaps upset the morale in the team. But on the other hand, keeping an underperformer can drain your time, frustrate your team, and even cost you your best employees. As I often say, if you're always hanging on to your worst employees, it's your best ones that are going to leave. So in this episode, I'm going to walk you through how to assess underperformance fairly so that you don't fire too soon, but also don't hang on too long. Welcome to De-Stress Your Business, this podcast where we show you how to get incredible results in your business without constant stress. I'm Alexis Kingsbury, a serial entrepreneur and founder at AirManual. Here's the thing, when times are slow, it's easy to hide underperformance. Those team members that aren't quite pulling their weight, if it's not that busy, it doesn't seem to matter so much. But when the pressure is on, those performance gaps get exposed. You see exactly who steps up, who takes ownership, and who crumbles under the weight or seems to hide away from the hard work. And so this is often a really good time to make those assessments because you've got real recent data to work with. You're perhaps feeling the pain of having someone in your team that isn't quite performing at the level they need to. But the question is, was this just a rough patch or a long-term issue? Is this something that can be fixed? Now, the biggest mistake that leaders often make is relying purely on gut instinct instead of reviewing patterns of performance over time. So before making any big decisions, you need to gather real examples of when that employee excelled and when they struggled. That way, you're working with data, not just the frustration that you might feel. Now, when you or a manager in your team then collates their performance data over time, there are some signs that they should be looking for that suggest actually this is someone who might be able to improve with some support, and therefore immediately ejecting from the organization is probably a little bit early. So the sorts of behaviors and things that you might look for are that perhaps they've performed well in the past but struggled recently, particularly if it's related to perhaps stress, burnout, personal issues, things like that. Another thing that you might look for is that they have in the past responded well to feedback. So they acknowledge mistakes or perhaps are even aware of their shortcomings and that they make conscious efforts to try to improve. Also, if you spot that, particularly for the areas that they're struggling with or underperforming on, if you spot that actually they're lacking some clear expectations and guidance, perhaps you've never explicitly outlined what you expect from in that area, given them the guidance, the training, the onboarding, etc., to be able to excel, then the issue might not be them, but you. And in fact, I've seen cases where leaders have hired and then fired multiple people into the same role, perhaps as their head of finance or a customer service position. And then you've got to ask the question, after doing that 3 times, is it really that each of those people wasn't the right fit for it and couldn't do a good job? Or have you not made it easy to do a good job and therefore the problem is yours? And that's often the challenge, is that here you're trying to make it easy for people to do a great job. And then if they're not performing, then we take action. So if you are seeing that they're good at responding to feedback, they perform well in the past, that perhaps they could benefit from more guidance, then you can do something about it. You can perhaps provide them guidance, clear expectations, or give them a structured improvement plan to help them address those gaps. But if none of those apply, or most of them don't apply, then maybe it is time to let go. So signs to look for that give you more of a sense of it's probably time to just draw the line is, firstly, if they've been underperforming for months, not just a few weeks, and particularly if that pattern repeats a lot, so that perhaps they have a good performance, then bad, then good, then bad, but it's months at a time, that would be a red flag. A really big red flag would be if they don't take responsibility for mistakes. So if they're not acknowledging that their performance issues are on them, that's a big concern. Another concern would be if you see that they've been draining time and energy from others, and therefore it's causing frustration in your team. If others are having to carry them for a long period, and again, particularly if they seem oblivious to this, that can cause a big problem for you. And as you're not seen to take action on this, you're likely to see some of your best people will leave because they're fed up with carrying that person on their back. The other thing to look for, which is your biggest red flag, is if you've already had multiple conversations with them, you've given the feedback, you've given explicit, really clear information on what you expect from them, and that you feel like you've done a good job of making it easy for them to deliver that level of expected performance, and yet nothing's changed. And particularly if they don't share guidance on what else that they feel they need, and instead they go, no, it's fine, yeah, that'll do, and then you're still not seeing the performance, then that's probably telling you that keeping that person will only cause more frustration, more stress for you and for your team. And I've experienced in my own businesses and working with clients that even a single underperformer can drag down the whole team. It lowers morale, particularly frustrates high performers, but also it can cost the business significantly in lost productivity, both in terms of the opportunity cost, but also the impact that it has on the business, and of course the cost that you're spending on them. So let's pull that out a bit so that you're really clear on quite how much it's costing you to not take action on your underperformers, because maybe your organization, I see this in a lot of organizations, where they tolerate poor performance way too long and don't set the bar high enough either. So let's talk about the real cost of keeping the wrong person too long. So it is easy to avoid that decision because firing someone feels hard. It's uncomfortable. But every time you keep that wrong person, you're paying a high price. You've got the lost productivity. So particularly higher performers and other colleagues will have to pick up the slack. They could be doing other things. There's an opportunity cost of their time. You've also got the impact of team morale. Your best employees will get frustrated or even leave when poor performance is tolerated. And hiring great people is so expensive. Typically, replacing an individual costs somewhere between 50% to 200% of the salary. So if you've got someone who's on 100,000, say, then the expected cost of replacing that person is going to be somewhere between 50,000 to 200,000. And so every time that you lose someone, that's the cost that you're incurring, as basically 6 months to 2 years of their salary to get them replaced. So you want to keep morale really good. You want to keep people engaged. You want people to be only leaving either because you're managing them out because of performance, or because it's the right thing for their career and you're as pleased about it as they are, rather than creating an environment where they just feel like, yeah, no, I'm not enjoying this, I need to leave. The other cost is that often leaders and you become the bottleneck, because you will spend more of your time fixing their work and coaching them and so on than actually doing the things you're meant to be doing, running the business, growing the business, all those sorts of things. And so, in fact, if you combine all of those things, there's seen research that shows that losing a single A player due to tolerating poor performance can cost your business 3 times their salary in the combination of those recruitment costs and lost productivity, right? Which kind of stacks up and makes sense. That impact can be so big. And yet, time and time again, I talk to people, speak to them at events and so on, where they say, how long should I wait, and how long, had them probably a bit long, and I'll say, how long? And they might say a year, and something like that is far too long. You need to be addressing that poor performance much earlier. So once you have reviewed their performance and looked for those patterns and considered the costs of keeping them versus managing them out, what's next? Well, there's 3 possible actions that you can take. The first is to give them a really clear improvement plan. So if it is fixable, set specific improvement goals and deadlines and guidance on how what good behavior looks like and what needs to change, and any advice you've got on how they can do that. Have regular weekly check-ins to track their progress and help them through that journey. And then if they improve, great. Like, you've got the performance high, and in our processes, we tend to say, once you've got back up to the minimum standard, great, tick, fantastic. But if you dip below again within a period of a year of receiving your essentially written warning and personal improvement plan, then we'd then go on to the exiting from the organization. Whereas if you can do a year like that, hitting our minimum standards, and great, it kind of resets the clock. So you should have all of that guidance in that performance improvement plan. And so if they do perform well, then great. And if not, you want to have that structure in place to have the exit conversation and explain, well, as per the written warning, as per your performance improvement plan, this is what the expectation that we had. This is the guidance we've provided. You haven't been able to hit that. It's regrettable on both sides. As a result, here's the end. Now, a note about those performance improvement plans: they only work if they're structured, detailed, time-bound, and measurable. Otherwise, you're just delaying the inevitable. Those performance improvement plans have to genuinely provide useful guidance that someone could follow to turn their performance around, but also provide you and your managers the ability to reassess that employee to see whether have they now achieved these things. And if not, make the hard decision, or if they have, fantastic, and be happy. And you need to set the bar high enough in that improvement plan that if they do achieve all those things, you will be happy and glad that they've done that and keen to keep them. You don't want to set it too low and then find that they've scraped through and you're still not happy, yet you're not taking them out of the organization. So make sure that you put the work into that performance improvement plan. I've got some templates and examples. I'll mention it at the end where you can get that. So that's the first thing, is providing them the guidance, that performance improvement plan. Your second option is start planning their exit. So if you conclude that it's not fixable, you've provided feedback in the past, they've not made the changes and so on, there's the point of no return, document the performance issues, document the past feedback they've received, and consult HR and legal advice to make sure that you're compliant with relevant laws and so on, and their employment contract, to make sure that you don't put yourself in a difficult position. But you need to document all the guidance, all the feedback that you've given that shows that you have taken reasonable steps to help them perform well, and they've not been able to hit that, and then get some guidance to make sure. And then you're going to need to prepare a clear, professional donation letter and have a conversation with them to let them know a conclusion. And ultimately, like, if you already know this person isn't going to improve, it is the kindest thing you can do for them and for your business. Let them go, because they won't be happy performing poorly in your business. They won't be happy surrounded by team members that are frustrated with them. And so they might stay because it's easier to stay than to go and look for another role. And sometimes they need that nudge, that push. So if it's not going to work and you've tried your best, then take the decision. It's the right thing for them as well as for you in the business. There is a third option, which is to do nothing. And then you have to deal with the consequences of that. In my experience, if you tolerate poor performance, your best employees will get frustrated, you'll keep firefighting instead of focusing on growth, and the problem will still be there in 6 months or more, but worse. And sadly, the truth is that most leaders pursue option 3. They wait and see and then regret not taking the action sooner. And it's really common. One of the first things that happens when you do that is, firstly, you might lose other team members that are good, which creates more pressure on the existing team to be able to deliver the work, which often means that it becomes even harder to extract the poor performer, because you feel like, well, we're already understaffed. We're so busy, so I can't get rid of them, because even though they're doing 20% of what they should be doing, that's 20% more than zero. So you end up keeping them, and that's a really bad decision. It can feel like a natural one at the time. The other thing that I often see is that we'll keep that poor performer and not take the steps to make sure that they can actually cope with losing that person. For example, making sure that their role is well documented, that there's good training and so on, so that if they won the lottery and left or got knocked down by a bus or whatever, that you'd be able to replace them. And so often leaders will hold back from that because they say, oh, well, they won't want to do that. And as a result, it'll be a hard fight with them to get them to document that. So they hold back and they don't tackle the issue. And then what happens, inevitably, is that person leaves anyway, which initially you're thinking, oh, great, they've left and I've not had to have the difficult conversation or pay them off or whatever. but they're now leaving and you're not ready to replace them, and you've had to cope with poor performance all of that time, and you probably lost some other team members and so on. So if you already know that that person isn't the right fit, now is the time to take the action and move forward and go through that process. So should you fire them? Should you give them another chance? Well, hopefully you now feel like you can assess the situation fairly and objectively, so that you're not making decisions based on your gut, and instead you're basing it on real performance. Not just the feeling of frustration, but actually getting the evidence, getting that information on what's been happening over time, what feedback they've provided, what guidance they've been given, so that you can make a decision on whether they have the potential to improve. And if they do, give them a structured plan and clear expectations. If they're not the right fit, don't delay the decision. You know that keeping the wrong person isn't just bad for your business, it's unfair to your best employees and even to the person who's struggling. Now, in the next episode of the podcast, we'll dive into how to actually fix underperformance without the stress or conflict, and particularly how to provide sufficient guidance to help them improve, but also how to have those difficult conversations. Because if you've ever struggled to give feedback or have tough conversations, then you're not going to want to miss that episode, because we're going to make it easy and much less stressful. So subscribe if you haven't already, to make sure that you get notified when the next episode is out. And through these episodes on managing poor performance, one of the things that I'll keep coming back to, and I've already talked about, is the need to have a structured process, whether it's a template or examples on how to write your personal improvement plan, and the written warning and so on, to make it easier for you, but also for your managers as you grow. You don't want to be in a position where it's hard for managers to manage poor performance, because what will happen is they'll just avoid it. They'll avoid having those difficult conversations because it's difficult. So as a result, it becomes easier for them just to say, well, maybe they can turn it around. I'll give them another month, another 3 months, 6 months, another year. So instead, you want a structured process that makes it easier. And to do that, we've written a playbook that includes a series of best practice processes that you can use to implement performance management. It's completely free. You can get it at airmanual.co/resources. And there, look for a playbook called Resolve Unsatisfactory Employee Performance. So resolving unsatisfactory employee performance. And if you found this episode useful, then please go to Apple Podcasts, leave a 5-star review with a comment, even if it's just one word. It makes a real difference. Really appreciate that. And of course, do share this episode with anyone that you know that is perhaps tolerating poor performance in their business. But otherwise, until next time, have fun.